Well, this is a great turnout. So good afternoon and welcome everybody for joining us for this panel, which I know is going to be of great interest to everybody here on the Vietnamese diaspora and the ongoing journey of conflict and reconciliation. In many ways, the discussion at lunchtime today is a curtain raiser for what we'll be doing over the next couple of days, which is a workshop looking at different perspectives 50 years on from the war and memories and issues around reconciliation. And that will be starting tomorrow. My own name is Tony Seish. I'm director of the Roger Wiley Foundation Institute for Asia and have been overseeing the various projects that we've been conducting over the years in Vietnam. First, I have some practical announcements. I'm sorry, I have to make first before we get to what everybody is really here for. And first of all, the foundation acknowledges the land on which Harvard University sits as the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people. We also recognize the continuing presence of the neighboring Wampanoag and nations. People should be aware that this event will be recorded and it will be available to stream later on the Ash Center's YouTube channel. There's also a photographer present. If you do not wish to be photographed for any particular reason, I'm quite happy to be photographed, however, please just let the photographer know and they will make sure you are not photographed. What we want to make sure is that we reserve time at the end of the panel for questions and answers. And so we're trying to ensure that there's plenty of time for that. If you are going to ask a question, please wait for someone to bring a microphone to you so that it gets part of the recording that will go, as I said, onto the YouTube channel. Please let us know who you are and any affiliation, should you so wish to say. And do remember, one crucial thing is that a question, in my memory, usually ends with a question mark. And so we should try and keep ourselves going with that. So on behalf, as I said, of the initiative, what I really want to do is extend our very special thanks to Frank and Catherine Yao from the Jiao Foundation. And it's their generous support that has made the event possible today and also what we'll be experiencing over the next 2 days. So please join me. None of this would have happened without Frank and Kathy's strong support to this. So it is, of course, a great honor for me to introduce the panelists. We have 4 panelists with different experiences, contrasting visions of the memories of the impact of the war. First, to my left here is Mai Elliott, who was actually a Pulitzer Prize nominee and the author, of course, of a book I'm sure many people here know, The Sacred Willow, 4 Generations of Life in a Vietnamese Family, and also RAND in Southeast Asia, a history of the Vietnam War era. Then we have Christopher Nguyen here, who's been a great supporter to our programs here and is a CEO and co-founder of Itomatic and was a former engineering director at Google and an expert in industrial AI. And first time I met Christopher on a panel, he said that one way he often introduces himself is to say, does anyone here have an iPhone? And if you hold it up, it says, yeah, I was part of the team that developed the whole Gmail and Google experience. So we have a very experienced panelist also. Next there is Tuan Ton, who was a former senior defense official and also defense attaché to Vietnam and being Deputy Chief of Southeast Asia Policy Division at the US Pacific Command. And last, but obviously by no means least, we have Julian Tran, who was a former commander of the US Defense POW MIA mission in Hanoi and director for Southeast Asia at Sierra Nevada Corporation. So here we are, 50 years on from the fall of Saigon. Vietnamese diaspora continues to carry on an extraordinary story related to struggle, reinvention, and I think most importantly, resilience, one that shapes not only Vietnamese communities here, but I think also globally. And what I hope we'll be able to do today is that the panel will help us move beyond the familiar narrative of survival and loss But I think one of the things that we want to think about is thinking beyond that, to highlighting the extraordinary creativity, the leadership, and the contributions that has made this community one of the most dynamic diaspora in the United States and beyond. And I learned from Frank last night at dinner that it's something like 2.5 million of this community scattered throughout the United States. So this is a rare opportunity for intergenerational panel to think about 50 years of unresolved legacies while we also look ahead. And what we will do is we'll ask each of our 4 members to start us off with 4 or 5 minutes of a comment about how their stories from their family or for themselves span across that period of time and also into their experiences as they came here to the United States of America. And I'd like to begin first with my Elliot, please.
Yeah, I think, can you hear me?
I think it's on.
It's on? Okay. I think what I would like to do is kind of set the stage about what Vietnamese Americans fled from, the war and its aftermath. So my family and I, we are the generation that lived through the Vietnam War, but we did not directly experience the fighting, unlike the period during the war against the French, when the fighting actually got to us and we had to flee. So, but it didn't mean, even though they lived, my family, I have to say that I left Vietnam and went back periodically. So what I'm talking about is mainly what my family went through. So although my family lived in the relative safety of Saigon, they did not escape the anxiety and the fear of a lot of Vietnamese of their background. I mean, urban middle class with government connection. So their perspective is not the perspective of all Vietnamese. It's mainly the urban middle class. So even though the fighting did not reach them until the Tet Offensive of January 1968, of course, on the end of the war in April 1975, when communist forces were on the verge of taking Saigon, they lived in fear and anxiety because there were terrorist bombings in Saigon and occasional rocket attacks. So they were always anxious that there could be collateral damage. But it was the Tet Offensive that really brought the war to them because insurgent forces penetrated Saigon, and they heard that there were squads, wandering through Saigon looking for people to eliminate, mainly government, civilian, and military personnel. But what they fear most, and I mean, what they fear also is how the war would end. Because being refugees from North Vietnam, they fled Hanoi in 1954 before the government of Ho Chi Minh came in and took over. So Saigon was like their last refuge within Vietnam. So they were very afraid of the outcome. Because if the other side won, they feared there would be a revolution. So the war carried also the threat of revolution. They were afraid that the new government would destroy the old social order and create a new one, a socialist one. And they would be pulled from their middle class perch and flung to the bottom of the society. They might be deprived of their rights, whatever they own, and stripped of the future, not only for themselves, but for their children and generations to come. So fear of fighting, but also fear of social revolution. So the arrival of the American troops gave them some hope. But then as the South Vietnamese government floundered, their hope gave way to anxiety. But then after the American withdrawal, of course, they were very, very afraid that the end might come. But then the South Vietnamese army appeared very strong. So they again hope against hope that maybe South Vietnam would survive. So the sudden collapse of the government and army in 1975 really took them by surprise. So they, as communist forces prepared to enter Saigon, they waited at the Tanzania Air Base, and rockets arrived, landed, but they escaped, and American helicopters flew them to the USS Hancock, anchored offshore. So they fled again. This is for the 5th time, but this time to a foreign land. But they were also happy that they escaped because they thought they were saved from a very perilous future. So it was both despair and hope at the same time. So I set the stage, and it's for the Vietnamese Americans to talk about how they adapted in the new homeland and prospered.
Thank you, man. That's, I think the sketching of the switching of emotions from sort of hope to fear to dismay is something that I think most of us find almost inconceivable. How do you deal with that at a personal level? But let me turn to you, Christopher. Your father's story, of course, is deeply tied into the war, the developments, the pain, and so forth. But I think what is interesting is that you didn't choose resentment. You've chosen really reconciliation as a way forward. And what helped you really make that choice? And what challenges have you faced along the way of trying to move to reconciliation rather than resentment?
That's a very good question and possibly controversial one, depending on how I answer it. I like audience participation. So how many people here, are still feeling the pains of the war today? And how many people think that communist Vietnam should be exterminated and we should just restore democracy in Vietnam? Okay, fairly safe audience. But of course, I know it is not working. Okay, maybe I should just speak up. So Tony introduced me. He said the first half of my sometimes self-introduction, but the second half was why I choose to introduce myself as the first engineering director of Gmail, so that people would dismiss me as a tech guy, right? So what does he know? So everything that I say that may offend them next, they can easily, dismiss with any cognitive dissonance. But I'll try not to do that today. Actually, I'd like to tell the story this way, which is Frank and myself, so we both support this program, but how I came to that role, I don't know if you know the story. Frank and I were both on the board of this university, US-funded university in Vietnam called Fulbright University. So I think we first met 2017, 18 or something, 8 years ago. And there was a board meeting, and Frank went there, and it was the first time I met him. I think we knew of each other. But Frank was just walking around, like very quiet, man, didn't say anything. And it wasn't until the pandemic when I started driving down to Southern California, because I have 2 daughters. I have 3, but at the time, one was at UC Santa Barbara, the other was at UCLA, and pandemic being what it is, you can't fly. So I let Elon drive me. And so we started spending more time together. So a lot of my thinking now is influenced by him, which is a way of saying whatever you think of what I say next. Okay. So shall I just? Yeah. Turn the other one off. All right. So whatever I say next, you can blame Frank for it, right? But I'll give a little bit of credit before I get to sort of my punchline. So when the Vietnam War ended, and I use that term, so remember I just said Vietnam War, I'll come back to that term. I was 9 years old. My father was a lieutenant colonel in the ARVN. And I remember very clearly the days before, I was a pretty precocious child. I remember a conversation that he and my mom had, and I grew up being told about this, to repeat it very proudly, that he was the chief of the 4th Bureau in the 4th Division in the 4th region of Vietnam, which is in charge of essentially logistics. So in other words, we could have left anytime we wanted to. But I remember my dad said to my mom, he said, look, this is the first time the country will be reunited, will be unified in many, many years, hundreds of years. And I've been to America for training. It's not such a great place for our family. So why don't we just stay? And how bad could things get, right? And things did get very bad. So we ended up being refugees. Basically both people out of South Vietnam, Cần Thơ actually. So I was not in the more metropolis city of Saigon, of Ho Chi Minh City. So we did experience, in the southern provinces, artillery and so on, and essentially going through 3 years under what most people would call communist rule. But imagine, it doesn't matter what the end of the war is, the winning side is going to try to pacify the country, right? And that means really clamp down. Any kind of authoritarianism and control was essentially signals to people to try not to rebel. What we did manage to escape 3 years after, right? And again, I remember the conversation between my mom and my dad. He had been moved around from prison to prison. And the last one was in Châu Đốc. I don't know, some of you may know where that is. Yes, that's right. That's right. And I remember the conversation. He says, okay, it's pretty clear. This is not a 1 week thing. It's not a few month thing. They're not going to let me go. So why don't you take the kids and escape? And of course, we tried 3 times. 3rd time succeeded. Went through, and we were talking at breakfast. There are many stories that we don't like to tell, because there's a weird kind of shame about being attacked by Thai pirates and beaten by belligerent villagers and so on. But I choose to look at the future, and I actually think of my life as having been very lucky, because I landed in Silicon Valley right at the beginning of the PC revolution, right? And I've been responsible for many things, including for Vietnamese in Unicode. I wouldn't say engineering leader at Gmail, and essentially the life has been one of technological revolutions, one after another. And so it is with that I say there was never a Vietnam War. There was never a Vietnam War. There was a war that was fought in Vietnam, just as it was fought in Korea, right? Just as it was fought everywhere else, and just as what you guys see today, right? And when Frank first got me in trouble with this program, I visited him down there, and Tony was there, and Frank said, and now we would like Dr. Christopher Nguyen to speak. And I said, what? You remember that. And so I proudly claim ownership to this word reconciliation. I thought, and the audience in Southern California is one that is still wearing very proudly this identity of being, on the democracy side at the end of the war. And I said, one of the things that I hope what Hai's work would mean is that all of these interviews, not just of warriors, but ordinary people, and you should hear Hai share many of these stories, not just the story that I just shared about being a refugee. There's a love story in some of those videos. I think these stories need to be preserved and shared, kind of like Google, organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful, right? Organize these stories and these videos and make it universally accessible and useful. It's not a documentary to tell somebody's point of view of the war, but when you hear these stories, you will come to realize that there's an identity greater than and outside of the identity that I used to wear, that many people used to wear, that we were somehow victims of the war, we're somehow on the losing side, or we should go back and fight and so on. In one sense, all Vietnamese were victims. All Vietnamese were pawns. And it's hard to, I use much stronger word in private conversation. But in a way, I think when people realize that and they rise above it, right? And they realize, no, I have an identity, I have a destiny greater than what has been defined by that war. I think that's when real reconciliation will begin. I'm sick and tired of being defined as a victim, right? And I don't want that for my children. Right? They are very proud of being Vietnamese. And by the way, there's this trend in the last 10 years, we can talk about that, right? That's what I want for them. Frank is, for example, he has a project to rebuild, the Bolsa, the Westminster area. And I said, Frank, you've built for the last 50 years for the previous generation. Whatever you do next, do it for the next generation, right? Let's not repeat, certainly learn from history, right? But learn it the right way and look to that future. So that's my answer to your question, what I have chosen to do.
No, I think that's very valuable, Christopher. I mean, just as a footnote for those who are not aware, Dr. Hai is there at the back. And what Christopher was referring to is an extraordinary set of materials that we've been able to compile of 800 or 900 video clips of talking to people, North, South, Catholics, Tsaudai, Buddhists, about what they think about the war. And I think in part because of the trust in Hai, but I think there's also an aging factor that many of these people maybe feel this is one of the last times to get down what they really feel about the war. And one of the things we're dedicated to this program is preserving those materials for the future. So that anybody who wants to come and think with the children, grandchildren, excuse me, they can look at those materials, which we think are objective. They cover a little different set of different perspectives. But let me now turn to Anton. Of course, you're also a son of an Arvin soldier, but interestingly, you went back to Hanoi as the U.S. Defense attaché. And I suppose there's a number of things I'd like to ask you, but one of them is, when you went back to the U.S. Embassy, apart from cycling around the country with Quinn, who is here somewhere, how did your family story actually shape the way the people saw you, but also in the way in which you carried out your work?
How about that? I'll speak louder. I probably don't need a microphone, but it's okay. Like many of you, and I'm really inspired by your personal story, and it's really encouraged me to think positively. And, I'd like to take that up front and thank you, Tony, for having me here, and see my old friend JT here too. How do the Vietnamese saw me? Is that what's your question?
Yeah, when you went back, primarily then to work as a defense attaché,
Do you hold this for me?
I thought it's both-sided. How your family's experience shaped the way you went about the work? How did people see you?
Well, first and foremost, I'm an American military officer. No more, no less. I present myself as such. Right? No Vietnamese official ever called me overseas Vietnamese, Viet Kill, or any other term other than American officer. If they want to be little clarity to it, they would say American officer with Vietnamese heritage. Period. Now that made my job very easy, and actually it's easier than most people imagine. If we put ourselves in the right spot, right situation all the time. And that's who I am when I perform my job, no more, no less. I told one of the reporters in Vietnam exactly what I just say, and he had to agree with me. There's no such thing as Vietnamese American military. It's only American military, and I'm one of them. I want to take my time and talk about the topic of this instead of sharing my personal story. Each of us have personal story, and none of them are the same as the other. They all traumatic in many ways when we grow up. And I inspired by Christopher and say, looking forward, put forward. And I'm not smart like a Gmail guy or the book writer. So I had to come up with a note to just make sure I deliver what I wanted to say and I'm not wasting your time. So I know this conference is very important because it may offer some possible solution, or at least explore the feasibility of the livelihood of reconciliation right on the board, right on the board. But from my perspective, I like to, if I could, offer a two-man point for us to discuss. And then at the end, I want to offer one reflection to think about or to consider to go forward. Well, the first point I want to make is clarifying our position. Second point is building trust. And the third one about a reflection. So clarity our position. I want to expand this terminology with respect and clarity. We often use the term of Vietnamese diaspora with a good intention. But many of us, many of my friends, military member, veteran, law enforcement officers sit right here, public servant, community life, we are no longer see ourselves as exile. We arrive as refugees, but the journey from refugee to citizen is complete. We are American. We have dedicated our entire adult life to serve this great nation with honor and pride. So referring to ourselves as diaspora may imply that we're still on the outside, or perhaps they're looking for a place to belong. While we cherish the Vietnamese heritage as we should, we are no longer living in exile anywhere in this world. Even the cultural ties remain. We are at home right here in the United States. We are fully rooted American. We are American. No prefix, no footnote. If I may take clarity of what I just say, and I say a lot about it, this distinction is essential because if reconciliation is going to take place, we got to clearly understand our current situation and position. To illustrate this point, may I use an analogy? Before GPS comes, a smart guy here come out with GPS and all that stuff, Google and stuff. Before GPS go, if you remember, you owe enough to remember, we have to depend on paper map. And without knowing your exact location, you cannot plot on the map to your destination. Reconciliation works the same way. We need to recognize and define who we are before we can plot a path meaningful forward in terms of reconciliation. Otherwise, it's just noise. One conference after conference, one rally after another rally. The second point I want to make is about building trust. Over the past 30 years, the United States and the Vietnamese government have advanced incredibly to improve the regulation between two countries, especially with the history of being enemies and the transition into comprehensive strategic partnership. And the reason it happened because both countries have worked very hard to build that trust based on the mutual benefits of both countries, one step at a time. And I was part of it. On the personal level, the community level, here we talk about the relationship with the Vietnamese American community and the Vietnamese government remains strengthened, or perhaps non-existent. And it deeply reinforces by post-1975, when we see unjust imprisonment, and many of our fathers in this room here, and you see it, I feel it, your father probably feel it, seizure of private property. Imagine yourself today, you go home today and your home is vacant. If you're lucky you have a home, maybe you don't have a home anymore, right? In my case, right? Or forced labor. And I experienced, like many of you, about forced labor. At the age of 14, hard farm work replaced my youth. So one afternoon in April 1975, an accident occurred on the farm. Both of my legs were broken, 1 inch above the knees. So I walk a little funny, you probably know it, but I recovered. Additional, you might refer to additional document published by State Department every year about human rights abuse in Vietnam. These actions stand contrary to the Vietnamese own Declaration of Independence, which states every man created equal. Because the word and deeds do not match. They do not align. What that means is the emotion scars. People hold on for 50 years, continue to linger. and continue to feel by the emotion, disturbing they had experienced. Well, one ambassador that I work for, Ambassador Tessos, and he published the book, Nothing Impossible. So I'm an optimistic guy, just like my colleagues over here. And to clarify, trust can be developed through honest and continual dialogue over time, because dialogue is the essential element of building the trust and the confidence, would in turn support the reconciliation process. And we can't do this part. I believe one key to progress rely on one central element, trust, T-R-U-S-T. I spell that word all the time. I make sure people don't misunderstood because of my accent or something. Well, this essential is those in power must first start with honest and sincere gesture. Imagine if you and I have a fist fight and I knock you on the floor. You're not gonna put your hand out. Pull me up. If I'm the guy who's still standing and you're on the floor, I better put my hand out. Then you will put your hand out and I will pull you up and we'll talk about what we fight. So the winner side, the one whole power, it would be helpful to start with that gesture. Apology, it was sometimes it doesn't work. Even Japan made multiple apologies to Korea, South Korea, and China. And I read it over. The word was beautiful, very sincere, but it's not acceptable in full scale. But gesture can make it. Let people decide what gesture it is. Well, I'd like to offer one reflection real quick. I've spent a lot of time. I'm a guy talk a lot. Well, here's one reflection for you to think about. In the next 50 years, generation 1.0, our parents, generation 1.5, most of us here, born, here you go, thank you, ma'am, for reinforcing. Born there, raised here. Those who fled, rebuild, and persist the memory that we have will no longer be here, around. Or will we still alive? We probably won't remember much. Right? The US-born generation will grow up fully Americans, shaped by diverse value without any traumatic memory, period. Your children, my grandchildren. I'm not that old, but I do have grandchildren. They may not have the same emotional connection or they feel the shocking impact that we experience. Will they feel any attention? Will they see any need for reconciliation? If we wait for another 20 years for my son to grow up, my grandson to grow up, how do we involve young people, not us, young people into this process to make something out of it? Well, I think one of the most critical, we should focus on reconciliation between the Vietnamese government and our parent generation. It's not so much for them, but for the generation to come. So let's work together, lay the groundwork. I'm retired, I got a lot of time. Lay the groundwork, build bridges, document this process, and one gentleman, I forgot who, may record this process, document the process. So when they look back, they should not see conflict, but courage, not division, but dialogue. So in summary, I want to capture those 2 points, clarify our position and building trust. It is possible if we really mean it. So I'm excited to participate in this panel. I'm looking forward to learn from every one of you today. Thank you.
And thank you. I think the last part you're talking about is actually a very apt description for what we've been trying to do with the program in trying to provide those materials so people can review them, can think about them, and begin to make their own decisions. I'm also from the generation that used to use maps. And I thought the point you made there is very telling. You have to recognize what your starting point is before you can really begin to think about reconciliation. Who am I? Where am I? What do I represent? And that really, I think you're quite right. Then doesn't put you on a kind of a false basis. It doesn't put you on a kind of a basis that someone else has decided for you, but it can come from yourself, I think, to help move that process forward. So let me now turn to Julian Tran. And of course, as we know, you have worked in one of the most painful legacies of the war, the accounting for those who are still missing. But, you know, were there moments there that showed you not just the challenges of the work, the trauma of the work in many ways, but also about potential for a healing between the two countries?
Okay, good afternoon. Well, afternoon now, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here. I'm surprised when they invited me, a lowly lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. Colonel Tong and I, we went back for 30-some years. Now, again, I don't want to talk about my personal experience in the past, but I just want to spend a short time here. My family, we lost my brothers, 2 uncles, they all South Army officers. They all died during the war. My father was a rich man. He lost everything after the war in 1975, when what they call it, pacification from the North. Now, in 1979, I was the first group of people left Vietnam, escaped Vietnam to Cambodia after the Vietnamese invading and defeating the Khmer Rouge. And 2 of us were killed along the way. I was the lucky one, and another friend. So I spent a year in prison and in refugee camp in Thailand, Philippines, before I came to America. The whole story that I want to bring it here is that regardless how hard it is life after you came to America, but America is the only country that gives me the opportunity to be who I am and what I am today. So for 28 years in service, from enlisting to become an officer, the last 2.5 years of my life I dedicated to looking for the MIA, those who mission in action in Vietnam. We still have about 1,566 MIA, but out of those, about 700-800 consider it unfound because they lost at sea. Some of them, well, believe it or not, they lost in China along the border. When they were shut down, then the aircraft kept going and they crashed in China. Some of them was crashed, was hit in Laos, but it crashed into the mountain in the highland in the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Why I want to spend my career, some of my time there, because I just want to repay the veteran, the American forces that have spent their life and sacrificed their life for the freedom of South Vietnam. Even that freedom is short-lived, maybe 10, 15 years, but at least we know what freedom means. We enjoy the freedom instead of dictatorship or autocratic of a communist regime. Now the hatred, yes. A lot of refugees, generation 1.0, still maintain that hatred to this day. But for the last 12 and 13, 14 years, 15 years, working as a strategic policy officer, I'm responsible for Southeast Asia, China and Taiwan too. And I went back all the time and working in Vietnam, doing engagement, security cooperation, humanitarian mission with the Vietnamese government to help the people, and only to promote the dialogue and the partnership between the two countries. I found that whether you're from the North or from the South. The people in the North, they lost a lot of relative, friend, family, brother, and sister. So that us in the South. Though it's gone, you cannot rebuild the past, but you can look forward into the futures. We officers, us often talk about it. Yeah, we have an accent, but we're American. We're not refugee. We're not diaspora. Sorry to say that. If anywhere anybody tell me, well, believe me, they were surprised when they see a Vietnamese nation representing America. And I went to China, Taiwan, Vietnam, and all other countries in Southeast Asia when I take a delegation and a representative of American military. They be kind of surprised. But I keep telling them, in America, you can be anybody. It is the land of opportunity. Going to be a lot of us. So, you want to make a reconciliation. Like Colonel Tong just said, generation 1.0 will be gone. 1.0 is the generation that who came or left Vietnam in April 30, 1975, and came to America. So those generation, the majority of those are what? Military officer, government officer, or their family. Yeah, a few civilian, but the majority of them relating to the Southern government. And those generation, they came to America. They work hard. They have a house, they have a job, they rebuild their life and providing support to the next generation. With those generation 1.0, it's very, very difficult to reconcile it. They were labor camp, re-education. I call that labor camp, that's not re-education. No economic zone, reactionary, confiscating your property. And when I work with the Ministry of Defense officer, including the Minister of Defense and all the other officers, and I explained to them, I say, you know a little bit about the American Civil War in 1861? When Lee surrendered, General Rand treating him with utmost respect as a friend in that house. And when the Southern forces walking by with their face down, a ragtag army, General Joshua Chamberlain, the one who fought at the Little Round Top in the Gettysburg, at that time he won star now. He stood up and he saluted the Southern forces, even though they are on the losing side. So the North treating the South as the brothers, not as an enemy. In war, we fight because that's what we do in the military. But we respect each other when even you win or you lose. I was working in Dong Ha. A colonel from the Vietnamese army, asked me, my counterpart from the Ministry of Defense. He said, tomorrow I want to go to pay my tribute to my comrade who would die in Quang Tri in 1922. He was a lieutenant there. And he said, we lost thousands of people. And a lot of my friends, comrades died there. I would like to ask you, would you like to come? Or can you come? Will you come with me? I say, I will. I go with you. I'm a soldier. You are a soldier. I respect you as a soldier. And I respect all the soldiers who fight in this world, whether they're North or South. But I will not burn an incense for them. But I'm willing to go with you. That reconciliation. That is how you work with each other. It's not cursing each other out. You want to reconcile. the government in Vietnam and the people who living in Vietnam, they have to understand that they have to extend their hospitality to the people who, the Vietnamese community here, not only in America, but throughout the world. Sincerity, it came from by action. Sincerity, not by word. Action means more than word. So if they want to reconcile, how? They have to have a roadmap to do that. But the most important thing is right now with people to people, exchanging idea and work it out. But my friend, after the generation 1.0 going away, like my friend here said, it didn't matter the reconciliation, it didn't matter anymore. With generation 2.0, my children, grandchildren, they're born here in America. They have no recollection of anything bad about Vietnam or the Vietnam War. Then they're gonna ask, why do I have to reconcile it? I'm American. I can visit Vietnam anytime. I can travel there. I can do business there. And so it didn't really mean something to the generation 2.0. It did only mean to more to us, generation 1.5, and the people who are suffering throughout the world because of the war. I ask you, all the scholar, academia, business people, we're not smart people. We're dumb, that's why we're in the army, okay? Only smart people become CEO and professor, okay? We ask you to help us to build that bridge, to extend your knowledge, to rebuild the relationship. We, like you want to say Vietnamese community, or for us, American with a Vietnamese background, we can only support you. But you, the one, have to do that, not us. We did our share. We have done our share as a military officer to do engagement with the Vietnamese government, building a lot of trust through the MIA mission. Not just only for looking for American MIA, we provide information to the North Vietnamese too. And we support their lab as well, providing a lab material. Okay? But the North Vietnamese Army or the local government, they do that to the people from the South Vietnamese Army. That really bothered me. We helped you to find your MIA. I mean the North Vietnamese soldier. But why can't you have the South Vietnamese soldier, former soldier, to find the MIA? So, thank you.
I think that's, I mean, reciprocity has to be a part of any process of reconciliation. So I think that's a very important example you gave. Listening to the four of you, I think maybe the dumb is on the side of the professors, to be quite honest. But
Okay, I'm leaving.
I want to leave plenty of time for questions, but maybe just a couple of quick things to follow up. Perhaps first with you, Mai. And I wanted to go back, to the Sacred Willow.
Yes.
And it's a sweeping, it's a broad story, decades of conflict, the family saga. If you look back on that, thinking about it now, are the voices, are the memories, or are the hardships that you would perhaps wanted to have emphasized more? Or do you think you got the balance right when you were putting the work together?
I think that as far as my book capturing what my family went through, several generations, starting with the arrival of the French, which started a long arch of fighting in Vietnam. I think I captured pretty well what they went through. Of course, I had to balance a lot of things in my book, not spending too much time on anything. So, like I told people, each of my chapter can be the subject of a PhD dissertation. So by no means did I go into depth of anything that happened, but as far as what my family had to do, I think I captured pretty well the dilemma of choices, because the choices were not always clear. There were always pros and cons on both sides. So I think as far as my family went, I think I did pretty well. But like I said earlier, my book only deals with the middle class, urban middle class. So I neglected the perspectives of the peasants in the countryside who actually bore the brunt of the suffering and the fighting. We all talk about what our family went through and how bad it was, but at least from the point of view of my family, I looked at it and I thought, really, nothing compared to what the peasants had to go through. Their daily life was a struggle for survival. They live under constant bombing, shelling, military operations. They paid with their own limbs. And so I think that's a perspective that I think we need to capture. So I would like to see more of the work maybe on what they really went through. So I think there's a lot of stories there to tell. And I think another thing is the voices of the women in the war. I think we've had some insights from the works of like the diary of Dang Thuy Cham and the work of the novelist Nhã Ca, who wrote about the Tet Offensive in Hue, the tremendous suffering of the people in Hue during the Tet Offensive, and the novels of Dương Thu Hương. But I would like to see more work done on what the Vietnamese women went through, both North and South. And so I think that my book certainly only captures a small slice of what Vietnam went through and what the Vietnamese people went through during that long, long period, starting from the French reconquest of Vietnam in 1946, all down to 1975, and even after, because, when you think of the war ending, you think that's, life will return to normal, but it didn't. Like all wars, there's a long period of reconstruction. And in the case of Vietnam, there was also social revolution. The middle class were really affected by what the communist government did after they took over the South. So there's a whole upheaval, social upheaval, that has not been captured. So I think that my book is by no means the end all of what happened in Vietnam to the Vietnamese people during both the French period and what we refer to as the Vietnam War.
Thank you. I think it's probably going to be more difficult at the current time to get the stories from within Vietnam about the transition. But as you said, there's remarkable stories from those who've been able to experience greater freedoms to be able to write about their experiences. And often it's inevitably, often the stories are either told by the victors or they tend to be told more by urban elites. Those, not just peasants, but I think even the poor in the urban areas, their stories don't have the opportunity to be told as eloquently as your stories reveal. I do have an eye on time, but let me just ask one last thing, maybe to Christopher, before we move on. And that's your work in technology. Do you see that also as playing a role in bringing both sides together, or whether we want to call it reconciliation or whether we want to call it something different? Do you see the work that you're doing as contributing in that sense, apart from the kind of economic progress and help that it brings to Vietnam?
One thing that I tell my Vietnamese American colleagues in Silicon Valley when they ask about, I do go back to Vietnam a lot, right? I work in Japan. One of my companies was acquired by Panasonic, and I led industrial AI there for 5-6 years. And during that time, even now, I built a team in Vietnam, and so I'd like to think that I understand what's happening there better than the average person in the Bay Area. And I say to them, a lot of them say, you know, hey, should I go back and help? Should do something? And I said, you know what? Vietnam is going to happen with or without you. It might as well happen with you. And I like people to recognize that, particularly as you, particularly in the Bay Area, there's now a sort of a second generation of Vietnamese non-refugees who have arrived there as college students, and there's a larger population there. And I think a lot about you know, the two gentlemen, the military officers, just like my dad, right? You remind me of my last image of my. No, you look just like my dad when I last saw him. But you know, you say that you're, you know, the business. I used to be a professor too, so but you know, military people have trained to have this mental fortitude, right? And I used to think very much like you. I used to. There are many things that I think about. The Madison Nguyen was going to be the first Vietnamese American mayor of a top 20 city, San Jose in the US, and she was taken down by I would say by her own fellow Vietnamese. It's a complex story there. And I used to think that, I'm going to use your term, you know, you just have to wait for generation 1.0 to pass. My own mother passed just this past December. And then I started seeing things that changed my mind. I do think reconciliation is necessary. I noticed, for example, I arrived in the US at age 13, first to Klamath Falls, Oregon. And now I'm able to visit Vietnam, you know, operate, talk to people there. I have 4 older sisters. The eldest one is 6 years older than myself. All of them will not set foot in Vietnam ever again. And I see just that gap in a few years. Very different psychology, which is way too traumatic for them. It doesn't matter what the facts on the ground are. It just brings back the memories that they had that I wasn't old enough to form. And I have to share this with you. 6 years ago, my nephew committed suicide. And without getting into details, there's a direct line between his death and the end of the war. So the war didn't end. Wars don't end for many people. And generation 1.5 is like we're a mix, right? I think we're very much like one another. How old were you when you got here? Probably maybe my age or younger. We're able to transcend that. But it does. Okay. You look younger.
I know what it's like.
Right.
I lived there for 4 years. After I lost everything, my family.
Right.
4 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've seen both sides of the story.
That's right.
I've seen the suffering, the life before 1975, experience life after 1975, and experience the first few years in America where I have to sleep in the public toilet.
Yeah.
Pick up the leftover to eat. Okay. No, finish that. Finish that.
Yeah.
But I just said I'm a bit older.
Yeah.
Okay, but I don't look like your father.
So you're 79 and I'm 78, basically leaving Vietnam. I think it does pass from 1.0 to 2.0, right? We're starting to have terms for it, you know, intergeneration, you know, trauma and so on. But I look at it very differently. If you look at the Cuban community, if you look at the Jewish community and so on, unlike us who don't like to talk about our victimhood, the 2.0 people sometimes wear that with a badge of honor. And it can be very destructive. And I don't want that for my children. Right? I want them to understand the higher level story of Vietnam. It was the war that was fought between powers that didn't really care about what territory it was fought in. It's not that identity is irrelevant. It's very difficult to shed. It's not easy for me to shed that identity, right? And so, yeah, the belief that I had that it'll go away with 1.0 was shattered when I started seeing young people protesting, when the US ambassador or someone would come and they protest with great passion and they absolutely believe what they do. But I can see the pain, the real pain in them. The pain for experiences that they never had, but it was stories told to them by their parents. So I think the work here toward reconciliation is still very necessary, and it is because I look to the future, for their future, that I believe that work is really necessary. I don't think I can impose my own psychology. I overcome that a lot more easily than my parents did, and I worry that my children would not be able to do the same. So I think your work here is very important.
Thank you. It's also, going back to what you were saying, Julian, Christopher's comments notwithstanding, that there's both the energy in Vietnam, and as you know as well as I do, it's now an incredibly young country. And so what we haven't really engaged with and captured through the work we've been doing is how young people in Vietnam are looking on this. And, again, for most of them, the war is a long way away. I mean, the only thing I can compare it to is, my parents' generation, I grew up in the UK, went through the Second World War. And, I was born in 1953, but it was a distant memory and in many ways not so relevant to me. Yeah, so of course, Christopher.
Yeah, Tony brings up a very good observation. The median age in 100 million population in Vietnam is about 31, 32 now. That means 50% of the people are 32 years old. The war is 50, the end of the war is 50. About 80 to 85% were born after the end of the war. The current mayor, so the chairman of Ho Chi Minh, which is one of the most populous cities there, was born in 1972. He has no memory of the war. And I think that's a good thing. So the people in Vietnam today are completely free of any wounds. They don't remember the war. They don't, one of the things I think you found is that they embrace Americans, right? With love and with kindness and so on. You hear all these stories about American veterans going back and being very surprised by that embrace, both by choice, but also by lack of any memory. So, but I think it is the quote unquote diaspora, right? It's the children of the 1.0 that I think are still receiving these stories, and that's why, and that's why I bring up the other parallels, and I think the biggest victims of Cuban communism that you can hear about are the people in Miami, right? It really parallels that.
It's funny. It reminds me. I took our former dean Joe Nye, maybe around about 2002, 2003, and we went to Vietnam. And we met with then the mayor of Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon. And I could see Joe was itching to ask something. And he was kind of holding back. And in the end, he just blurted it out. I don't understand why you don't hate us. And the reply was very much along the lines of what you're trending to, that that was a person, who would have some memories of the war, given this was a while back. But it was very much, we have to look forward. We have to get on. And we know to get on means we have to develop a good relationship with the United States of America, whatever one might feel personally. And I think Joe was quite shocked to hear that. But I really want to open it up for questions and comments from the floor. And as I said, please wait for the microphone to come. Let us know who you are. And remember, questions end with a question mark. There's a lady here. Yeah.
Ready? Hi, my name is Doang Hoang Curtis, and I made the series on Netflix, A Turning Point Vietnam War, the series producer, and I was helicoptered out on the last helicopter out of Tan Son Nhut when I was 3 years old at 12:05 a.m. 10 hours before the tanks rolled in to the fall of Saigon, and we left my older sister behind. And I grew up replaying the fall of Saigon in all of my work for the rest of my life. And I did a film called Oh Saigon when I went back to Vietnam the first time and found out my father fought against his older brother. My uncle was a communist. My father was for the South. He was a major in the Air Force. And their younger brother, who was lower class, actually was anti-war. And he was married to a Viet Cong lady, Viet Cong. And working on reconciliation between my family and also showing the film in America and at the US Embassy and consulate in Vietnam, I noticed that there was a large amount of resistance from Vietnamese Americans, diaspora, to reconcile. Often, I think once I was called a communist tool by one of the Generation One, and then when I showed my film in Hanoi, there was a dead, quiet response because of some of the things my father said. And I am also working on a film right now. If anybody here is also a survivor of the fall of Saigon, I'm doing a film about different sides, American and Vietnamese, who have trauma sense and intergenerational trauma. So I'm interviewing family, children, partners, et cetera, of Marines who were in the airlift. But what I'm saying is that there's still, in my work, which I have hours of footage, I'm happy to, hundreds of hours of footage to donate. I'm happy to share. But when we, in Turning Point Vietnam War, there's a moment where Ton Nhu Tinen, who was the ambassador to the EU, says, we made many mistakes in the way we dealt with imprisoning people after the war. And people protest her. You know, people go to protests against her when she comes to America. And there's a resistance from the first generation and a lot of 1.5 and generation 2 against reconciliation. So I'm just curious if anybody has anything to discuss about those, those wounds that never die. Like my older sister, when I was working on Turning Point, she said, "You're interviewing communists?" And I was like, well, they were in the war too, but there's a large resistance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that reflects the complex legacy. And I've heard so many stories of families where they were divided between North and South. But let me collect maybe a few kind of questions and comments and then ask people to reflect on them. There was a gentleman there with a whitish t-shirt, and then the gentleman here at the front wearing the cap. Oh, sorry,
Hello.
Ambassador. So that would be 1, 2, 3. And then maybe we'll take some responses from people. So please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Chris Dang. I am Vietnamese American born. A lot of what you all say is so much resonate with me because I'm second generation Vietnamese. And so the stories that I hear growing up from parents and the attitude and the emotions behind it, I think really resonate with me from everyone. The angles each of you all have, I've heard from various family members. And I'm definitely the product of that. And so I see that I'm 30 years old now, and with the way that I was raised to think about Vietnam, it was mostly told in the lens of war and struggle and defeat and family who had passed through the boat or killed by pirates. And so I also worked my last job was working with Vietnamese community as well in the Bay Area closely. And I heard a lot of stories. And so that has really fueled my understanding growing up of Vietnam. And I started to really want to change that. And I was like, is there a different version of this that I don't see? You know, with the growth of social media and the way how Vietnam is in ways, it's a trending place right now. There's so much happening there. I think I absolutely agree with the young, you know, population there right now with so much innovation and changes. And so what I'm seeing with my Vietnamese friends who are also Vietnamese American, and we come from a very similar background growing up here in the States, we're like, oh, we now want to connect with Vietnam. We see a bridge between young people in Vietnam who stayed and then those who are here. And we're like, wait, the stories we've been told, yes, they're real, but there's an opportunity here for us to have a dialogue, you know, and I'm noticing that. And I do a lot of social media stuff where I connect with other Vietnamese in Vietnam and then kind of bridge that with the Vietnamese here. And I can feel the energy amongst every Vietnamese from Vietnam and also Việt Kiều here that in ways we're not calling it reconciliation, but we want to redefine our understanding of our own country, you know, where we came from, where our parents came from. And so
maybe we need to give other people some choice.
Oh, sorry.
I don't think there was not necessarily questions there, but I think in both comments there were reflections on what the panel had been talking about in terms of how do you think about bridging the differences? How do you think about reconciliation? And as you say, are there alternative stories that are out there that one might want to hear? But May, you had a comment.
Yeah, I just want to say that the tenor of my talk may make you feel that in my family, we adamantly oppose the reconciliation. That's far from the truth. You mentioned the division among the different generations, you know, the older generation who are against reconciliation, who are still bitter about how the war ended, and then the younger generation. So that division exists in my family because my oldest brother was put in a re-education camp for 5 years. So he hates what happened, what's happening. He won't go back. But the rest of the family, you know, we go back to Vietnam. It's a great vacation spot. It's a trendy spot. We go back we visit our family tombs. We reconnect with the relatives who are still in Vietnam. So I think that on a personal level, there are many stories of reconciliation. It's on the community level that I think you might find resistance, and then division within generation 1.0 and the rest. And in Vietnam, I think what I've observed is that the younger generation don't have any memories of the war, and they really moved on, and they look to the US as a, you know, like the cultural center of the world. So for them, the war really never happened. And so I think that on that level, and I think another reason for that is Vietnamese Americans, we kind of nurture that suffering, that trauma. It's harder for us to go beyond it, but people in Vietnam, the younger generation, you know, they have a future. They're building a new Vietnam. They think of the present and of the future. They're not captives of the past. And that's all I want to say about reconciliation.
Just further, I mean, of course, younger people in Vietnam are not really allowed to know about a history of the war.
That's also true.
And if they do, it's a very officially written kind of history, which doesn't allow for the kind of explorations that you've been talking about, and I think people are able to explore while they're outside of the country. Christopher, did you?
Is it Michael? Chris Dung. Okay, same as me. That's right. Thank you. Thank you. You are exactly the people I want to speak to. So I hope you don't take this as advice, but observations. So there are 3 stories I want to share with you on how you might take into account and sort of move in the world. The first story is that maybe I didn't share before, but my dad died in a re-education camp. I myself am a victim, right? Went through both people experience and all that. That's just to establish my creds, right? I say that nobody has greater right than I do. At least have equal footing when I talk about the war. I was 12 and I understood everything. The second story is that a lot of people don't realize, but Vietnam as a country is that the 1 in the 4,000 year juncture. Some people say once in a lifetime. I actually think it's 1 in 4,000 years. If you study history, you study the Qing dynasty, that's sort of recent history, and you study what's happened there. When September 10th, was it 23? 23 or 24? 23. When President Biden came to Hanoi for this comprehensive strategic upgrading, that was Vietnam upgrading US status. I was there, right, at the JW Marriott. Within a month, President Xi met with Vietnam. That has never happened to any other country in the world, let alone Vietnam. I can tell you lots of statistics, lots of numbers and so on to say that, to justify what I said, Vietnam is going to happen with or without you. And with or without people in this room, right? You can choose to participate in that or not, but it's going to happen. And so the third story, the one that I'd like you to discover more on your own, relates to what I said about why there was never a Vietnam War, right? And I think you can learn about Vietnam today through TikTok. And I don't mean the stories of Vietnam, about what's happening with wars globally. And you see it through that lens, and you learn about history, you learn more, you realize there's a bigger picture here, right? And so it's not about reconciliation by forgetting history, it's about learning about history and then realizing there's a different storyline here, right? And so that you can connect the stories and say, this should not happen again, right? Because it could happen again, right? Great powers have, prerogatives and have motivations. Vietnam is at a very precarious point. It could be pulled into such conflicts again, right? US-China relationships and so on. And so it's really important for young people like you to know that history, because the future, it's going to be led not by people like us, it's going to be people like you. So you should understand. So that's what I mean by reconciliation, right? Not with anger, not with pain, but with really higher level of understanding.
Yeah, after Julian, we have
Yeah,
2 more comments, and then I'll ask panelists to kind of wrap up.
I just want to say a few things to Generation 2.0. Okay. First of all, you're not Viet Kiều. You know what Viet Kiều mean? Viet Kiều mean the people who still US, who live overseas, but they still have Vietnam, they still holding Vietnam passport. They are Viet Kiều. They are still Vietnamese citizen. You are not. So am I. So we are American. We're not Viet Kiều. Okay? I argue with them all the time. No, this is delicate. When people call me Viet Kiều, I say, I don't like that. I'm American. When I go to work with, when I have a dialogue with the military officer or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Public Security, are you Viet Kiều? No, I'm not. I'm American. I'm representing American government. I'm a US military officer. I'm not Viet Kiều. I'm American. Well, yeah, I can speak your language. I'm willing to talk to you about it. Okay, that's one. Number 2, if you want to read books to learn about the Vietnam story, I read a lot of books. Majority of the book came from American point of view. American point of view is not representing the Vietnamese point of view, especially from the South. That's number one. Number two, if you read the book that is written by the communist or author, or right now, today, any books about Vietnam, the winning side always they change the history. You watched the movie, The Red Rain, that they come out last month. Like, wow, this is a blockbuster. But I watched that movie. I say, there's a lot of BS. It is
What does
BS.
What BS stand for? Bachelor of Science.
Yeah, Bachelor of Science, man. Okay? All right, so when you want to read something, I want to explore many, many aspects from different authors, from the winning side and for the one who lost the country. In my lifetime, and my friend here, we served a long time in U.S. military. He's 32, I'm 28. Well, he's older than me. That's why he looked like his father. Okay, not me. Okay, so let's look at it this way. We witnesses two American forces withdraw. It's heartbreaking, devastating. When I watched the movie that 3 years ago when we pulled out of Afghanistan, I cried for weeks. Because my lifetime, I've seen that twice. And every time I think about that, it hurt, painful. We spent 20 years in Afghanistan. And for what? And we spent, 58,000 Americans died in Vietnam. Looking back, for what? Because, like he said, Vietnam is just a pawn between the great power. If you have to be careful to choose your direction, the country that you go in, you're gonna fall. You go to war again, or somebody will invade you again. I'm not talking about right now. I do not want to talk about strategic policy. I just want to talk about number one, we're not Viet Kiều. Number two, read, not from the computers, what do you call them, research and then publishing book. You have to go to see. You have to see, you go, see, otherwise you go, see, you go, then you know. You see, then you know. Otherwise, you don't know what you don't know. You can watch the movie in Saigon. Wow, with beautiful city, man. It is cool, man. I want to go to Saigon. Yeah, go there. You can't even breathe. It's on the smoke. Well, my people from America, man, they're afraid to cross the street. The car won't stop for you. They're going to run you over, my friend. So you have to go to know. You have to see to know. Otherwise, you don't know what you don't know. All right, have fun.
Yeah, I must agree that crossing the streets is one of the most dangerous things I know. We have very little time left, but maybe the last two comments by yourself and Ambassador Quinn, and then if people want to make some wrap-up comment after that, please.
My name is Tak Furumoto. I'm a Japanese American who served in Vietnam, 1970-71.
Thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you.
I loved you.
Right.
Just like everyone. I love you.
Well, you know, I agree with you guys. America does give opportunity. Our family were locked up in U.S. imprisonment during the World War II because of our heritage. But this country does give opportunity. We've done well, and I agree with that. I have a question for you guys. You know, America dropped you. I work together with officers. I work in the pacification program, counterinsurgency, and Bear Speak near Cu Chi. Like your father, I worked with Arvin, and your father was a light colonel and we worked together like glue. But 1973, we dropped South Vietnamese troops. I mean, and we didn't do anything to help. And I know what happened afterwards. They served. You guys were in prison. I mean, the officers, especially generals like colonels. I just wanted to know how you felt about the U.S. government. Again, I don't want to, talk bad about it because I do believe in reconciliation like you do. I mean, our family, we lost everything. We went to Hiroshima, Japan because our grandparents were victims of atomic bombing. So I understand war. We are a product of war. I understand that. I just wanted to know how you felt about the U.S. government just dropping you. I mean, there must have been a way they could have done it. They just dropped you guys. I just wanted to know your comment.
I can answer you that. Right?
Okay.
Maybe firstly.
Oh,
So
okay.
let people ask questions.
Hi, thank you. Frank, Catherine Zhao, if this is the only event of the conference, your support has been incredibly worthwhile. This has just been fascinating and wonderful and energizing. So thank you for having this, and Dr. Hai for inviting me. I have a connection to everything that everyone spoke here, but I'm married to a Vietnamese. My brother-in-law was killed in the last 2 weeks of the war up by Cu Chi. His body's never been recovered. It's a great pain to my wife's family, who are all in the United States. And here, for most of them, they can never go back. I live in Des Moines, Iowa, red state. April 29th, there was a celebration there. I walked in. The South Vietnamese flag was everywhere. They played the old national anthem. Everyone stood. The war's not over for that part of that generation. There, I was blown up in Saigon by one of those rockets, the Majestic Hotel. I served in Chao Duc, where your father was. I'm so sorry what happened to him. But I was involved in arranging evacuation at the very end. I went behind the ambassador's back with Frank Snepp and Lacey Wright, some know them. We set up a secret evacuation plan, and I went to the NSC and went to Brent Scowcroft and got the president to approve our plan being implemented. And I was also involved in boat people, in changing American government policy. I was chair of the interagency task force, POWMIA, came to Hanoi, negotiated there, for 20 years after the war. So,
1985. That's when Joint Task Force began in Hanoi.
Yes, well, I started with the Woodcock Commission in 1977 and going and bring back 10 sets of remains from Hanoi. But I was a civilian State Department officer. I commanded troops in battle in MACV in Tone. I have the Army Air Medal for flying with the 7th Air Cav every night. But to me, I think the two great lessons of the war, one was how the American military performed when our country was no longer committed to winning but stood by. But the other is the conflict and reconciliation in America and among Americans isn't over. The most painful thing for me was being accused by United States senators and congressmen of hiding information about live American POWs and being excoriated about that. And I believe you can trace from the end of the war to today those divisions in American society and that. So I'm pleased. Thank you for letting me have a brief say. The only other observation was the only time I've ever seen race disappear in American society was in the jungle under fire in Vietnam when Americans hung together on that. But for all of what you all are doing to promote that understanding, and that I went and negotiated with North Vietnamese. We got along. I got along very well, and I always start every conversation with saying, "We are committed to never having the Khmer Rouge come back to power in Cambodia. And after that, I could get political prisoners freed from jail, et cetera." So thank you for letting me a chance. And Frank, Catherine, thank you again so very, very much.
Thank you. So we are beyond the breaching hour, but I would like all our panelists, if they have any final thoughts to share with us. Start with May.
Well, first of all, I think, Ambassador, you embody every phase of American involvement with Vietnam. And you touch on the division within US society. You just have to watch the Ken Burns documentary on Vietnam. It really captures that division. I think, and the thing I like to say really is about your question about American withdrawal. I think that, I think Vietnamese bought into the story that America was in Vietnam to save South Vietnam, to bring democracy, save democracy in South Vietnam. But if you study the background history of US involvement in Vietnam, it was really about fighting communism. It was a fear of that the communist bloc was expanding slowly around the world, the domino theory, and that Vietnam was a war really with communist China, that North Vietnam was a surrogate for communist China. So it was really the story of the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the communist bloc. So when Kissinger and Nixon looked at the world and they saw an opportunity to have an rapprochement with China, they took that opportunity, and that's how they withdrew from Vietnam. So I think that Vietnamese shouldn't be mistaken to think that America was there to save them. America was there for its own national interest, and national interest always trumps everything else. So I think that the withdrawal was a surprise, but it wasn't really. So that's all I think I'd like to say to that.
Thank you. Absolutely. For many of us, we look at history and we date the end of the war to 1972 with the Shanghai Communiques. Exactly what you're saying, and we can get into details of that. But I want to have a nod to Ambassador Quinn, because I have a great love and admiration for career foreign service officers. I know Ted Osius. He's just moved to Vietnam. He actually left his job in DC to do that. I also know Dan Carter-Bring and the current Mark Napper. And I think in many ways you embody, as Mai say, this is something that the Vietnamese somehow intuitively get. They distinguish between the people, the individual, even the warriors, even from the machine. There's a machine. And many people, like Ambassador Quinn, try to mitigate the effects of the machine, if I can say it that way, right? Even to this day. And you should really talk to Furumoto-san. I have an amazing personal story. His is like 10 times that. He was he was actually imprisoned, right, during World War II, and then went to Hiroshima. How many people still remember that name, right? Just right after the atomic bomb were dropped, and then came back, and if I may say, proved your Americanness by being one of the most decorated officers, in Vietnam. So he has seen a lot, and the work that Hai does is trying to draw not just the Vietnamese born point of view, but people from China, people from Japan, people from America, and so on. And in that process, sort of, you hear the narrative begin to shift. You realize that there is a bigger picture, right, that we've all been missing. And learning that bigger picture suddenly frees you from all the shackles of the stories that we grew up learning. I remember, if I may share, when I first, you talk about the movies, right? When I first got to the US, believe me, I was more pro-American than Americans. Because Americans were fighting. I didn't know about the anti-Vietnam War, anti-war protests and so on. And I remember watching in black and white TV, The Deer Hunter. And then after that, Apocalypse Now. And in my then 14, 15-year-old brain, it broke. I didn't get what was going on. Not from the language. I picked it up fairly quickly. But this was narrative violation. These were supposed to be my friends, our side. These were, my dad was fighting along the side of these people. And yet in those movies, people like my dad were treated like disposable cockroaches, right? And not worse than that, like they were the bad guys, right? And so I started reading. I could not bring myself to read or watch Stanley Karnow's Vietnam, a story, and then Vietnam, a television history. But of course, much later, the Ken Burns, I was able to see that. So for me, it's been 50 years of reconciliation, of learning more and more and more about the war. And so when I mentioned the Qing dynasty, that was not a random comment. It has relevance, right? That China suffered this century of humiliation. There's a story behind that. So I think understanding those things, hopefully preventing history from repeating itself and then moving forward is what I think is an important story for this 2.0 and 3.0 generation of Vietnamese and Vietnamese Americans to understand and to know about.
I got the microphone.
Well done, man.
Well, first, thank Tony for inviting me here. I love to talk, you can tell, but I know these fellow here want to talk too. So, but ladies, I forgot your name, but I would love to know you a little more about what you do. You keep doing what you do, and after this, if any way I can help, let me know. Well, Chris, a young man back then, he left already? Oh, okay, but some of the Chris friend about your age over there, you have a choice. You take the bitterness or inherit the wisdom from people who gone before you. Remember, reconciliation is not about endorsement. It's about creating space to move forward with meaningful life and pass it to people behind you. Keep that in mind. Sir, thank you for your service. In one way or another, you saved my life and my family. And I'm deeply honored for you to know you today. I was a top military guy in Vietnam for 4 years. And I always have a question in my mind as a top military guy representing the United States government. If the White House and the Pentagon would call me and ask me, Tuan, what is your recommendation for something related to 1972, 73, or so on, what would I say? And I always keep one thing in my mind. I am represent American interest. Reflecting your point over there, no more, no less, from the American point of view. If that was inside my heart at the Vietnamese origin and carry the legacy, that would be different. But up here, decision making up here, not here, at the government level. So I share your frustration in some way. I always keep in mind, if the White House, the Pentagon call me, that's what I would say as an American officer. So what you have done is amazing. I mean, amazing. I know exactly what the path you went through, all of that step, because in my job, I gotta keep up with this stuff. It's amazing, and you'll be here today to share those thoughts. It's incredible. I would be remiss not to say one more thing, last thing. I talk about trust and gestures and all of that stuff. And I know this foundation have high credibility, famous, and all of the adjectives that I can add to it. So if you can help one thing to make this dialogue work, to make the gesture work, it's one thing. The National Cemetery in Bien Hoa. You probably heard about it, for some of you. It's 16,421 souls resting there. Right? None of those guys died after 1975. But the gesture to take care of those guys will say volumes. You don't have to open your mouth. The government don't have to open their mouth and say, I'm sorry because this, because whatever the government say, people here are not going to accept it, right? Because oh, it's not sincere enough. It's not yet the softer voice. It should be a harder voice and stuff. But just something solid, structural will leave an image. So we talk more about that one. If you can help, that's one of my real deep projects. And we had a couple of gentlemen down there help me with that cemetery too. So one symbol, something stay for generations to come. And 50 years from now, when they look back, yeah, that group gathered at Harvard, they started this thing. I will feel good when I die. Well, thank you all.
Okay, again, we already talked earlier, okay? And so I want to say thank you again too many times, okay? As a military officer, when we execute the war, what do? We follow order. We think, whether we like it or not, the decision maker somewhere up there. Either you resign commission or you execute the mission. But back then, you cannot resign your commission. I do understand your point. But do you know that Americans been doing a lot of the detoxification, providing a lot about, help assistance for dioxin, the mining. We done a lot. We do a lot in the last 20, 30 years. In fact, I personally went there. I was a security cooperation officer. I'm responsible for Southeast Asia policy, strategic policy with Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And we do a lot of those. I will tell you a little story. I was the military officer. I trained a lot of officers from different countries. And I have one Egyptian officer who was a major. I was a captain back then. And one day we have a dinner and he said something like that. I would love to go to war again, American. I was shocked. I said, what the, you talking about, man? You my student, right? He said, no, let me explain. If we win, we'll be famous like Vietnam. But if we lose, American will rebuild my country 10 times better than what it is today. No, it's it. Think about it. Look at Korea. Look at Japan, Taiwan, Europe. So in Vietnam, if you are American, you go back to Vietnam right now, they love you. They love American over there. I invite many of the former Vietnamese officers to look for MIA so they can relay the mission, where they were, especially in Khe Sanh. I brought back one former American Marine captain who was the company commander at Khe Sanh and one sergeant. They have no hatred against each other. One night we were drinking. Well, I don't drink, I'm the translator now. And then the Vietnamese Major General, he reported a toast. And he said, nice to meet you, Captain. The American captain. He toast, and he said, well, really, Lance, really happy to see you because you were a lousy shooter. And the Vietnamese general kind of like, because if you were a good shooter, I already dead. I won't be here today to have a chat with you, to drink a wine with you. There were many Vietnamese veteran group came back to Vietnam and to try to reconcile. And they bring back many memories, but also they want to close it behind them. I ask you, if you have or have not, go to Vietnam one day. Right. And visit some of the battlefield to learn that. And then you bring, you can bring it, push everything behind. We cannot live with the past. You can learn from the past, but the passé, it's gone. You can learn from the past, so you don't make the same mistake. You read the good book, but the bad book you read too. A good book, you read the good book so you know what good to follow. The bad one, you know what is bad to avoid. And this experience right here, I hope from this forum, from what we learned about the Vietnam War, somebody somewhere in Washington can learn that before we go to war again. We need to know our end state, not just to win the battlefield, but to win the war. You can win every battle, but you lost the war. That's what we did in Vietnam. So, smart people, not dumb military officer like us, bring this message to Washington. Don't go to war unless you know the strategic objective is obtainable, so we don't die in vain. Thank you.
I think that's great advice to finish on, especially sort of learning from the past. And,
One last sentence.
Yeah.
Which is 50 years after the end of the war, the last casualty of the war has yet to take place. People are still being maimed and killed around militarized zones, unexploded ordnance, landmines.
very true. So please join me in thanking the panelists for a very
Sorry about your comment, so thank you, sir.
full of you.